You would agree, 5 very busy, full, informative and thoughtful presentations. And now it's over to you to put your questions, points or observations to the panel. The way we'd like this to work, please, if you can raise a hand, we'll bring you a floor microphone. If you can tell us who you are and whether you have a particular victim in mind for your question or whether it's for all 5 of them. The first hand is up over there. Can we get a microphone to this aisle here? There we go.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for these brilliant presentations. They were extremely informative and, yes, interesting. My question is, well, you are all the victims, actually. It's for the whole panel. I would like to introduce it as follows. Yesterday, the speaker from Friends of the Earth advocated the need of a synergetic approach of questions related to production and consumption in a number of areas. And I fully agree with that view. But I would like to add to this the necessary thorough redesign of our social and economic system. Because it's all very well to speak of sustainability, public awareness and education and promotion of individual behavior change, but as long as most individuals will have to work 8 hours a day in a place far from their home, we cannot really expect from them to change anything to their consumption habits. So picking up on Mr. Wortley's brilliant presentation, for example, nothing prevents us from dreaming that new technologies will offer opportunities and prompt the creativity of millions and millions of citizens, but I'm afraid that reality will soon catch up with us, and it is, as a matter of fact, already catching up with us. As long as we do not face the fact that a majority of citizens are either crushed by poverty or by their profit-driven professional life. And this reshaping of our economical model should consider the global scale, because I'm afraid that so far intelligent location has been understood as relocation of companies to countries where manpower is cheap. Okay,
let me stop you there so we can get some answers in. But so thank you for the question.
Is what does the panel think of the need of integrated a thorough questioning of our profit-based free market business model into our thinking about smart growth and global environmental protection?
Thank you very much. David, let me come to you first on this, because it sounds very much like when you presented the pace of change, that sounds very exciting, but it's also very daunting for people who have actually got to make investment decisions at a time when funds are tight. Is that not a disincentive to people? Do we not need to either, does the technology not have to either adapt, as our questioner says, to economic reality, or else we're going to have to take our decisions in different ways?
Well, it's very interesting, and it's a very tough question. I think one of the problems with innovation today is there is too much of it. We live in a society where the technology is creating huge opportunities for innovation that can be adopted by anybody, and this is where the issue of sustainability lies. And anybody who's trying to think of making investments in this sphere, they've got to recognise that a lot of these innovations will wither and die. The advice that I would really have is to think in terms of infrastructure. The most important investments are to do with lasting infrastructure, and this is where I think your community has an enormous role to play by making sure that the data is reliable, accurate and verifiable, and can be shared to allow others to develop those applications. As a society, we need to invest in things where there's a minimum amount of risk, and I think this is where the least risk is going to be in using Inspire to create the right kind of infrastructure.
But Ed, I mean, you made the point that innovation needs to have the freedom to fail. If you're an IT manager in a public authority facing 10% year-on-year budget cuts, that's the very last thing you want to hear, isn't it?
Well, it might be, but that said, you can, I believe, fail cheaply. I mean, one of the big changes that's happened through the growth of the internet is it's now much cheaper to do things that previously took large enterprise systems. It's easy to try things out. It's easy for those things to fail without impacting on your core infrastructural systems. You can try, you can experiment. A lot of the idea of government as a platform is to allow the innovation to actually happen outside, to allow others to innovate on your behalf, and you get the benefits, you get the shared benefits from that innovation. So actually I think in times where we are challenged from a resource point of view, that's the time to innovate most, because that's the time where you will need those major shifts in capability and efficiency to move forward.
Hank, does the migration to the cloud help in all of this? Are there more and easier choices and cheaper choices out there?
That's a difficult question. I will never forget that when we started to work in Pakistan, that I got a call from one of the legal people in the government, and they told me that I will be brought to court because the Pakistan government do not allow to use the cloud. So that's strange when you're in the middle of relief phase. I think the cloud is one of the buzzwords. Because it's the internet, the cloud. It brings us all the computer power together in a dynamic and flexible way. So yes, of course it helps because it's part of the infrastructure. But it's not smart, so we have to make it smart.
Louisa, you spoke about the need for structures and decision-making processes to change. Can you unpack that a little bit? What needs to change?
Which point? Which point are you referring to?
Well, if we're going to keep pace with changing technologies, changing media for exchanging information, do we need structural changes within the ways in which we make decisions in government? Does the structure of government need to change?
Yes.
Louisa, your voice just got deeper.
Well, I think that there needs to be a greater ability to incorporate data more rapidly and to be able to also have a much better interfacing with the scientific community, have much better accessibility to more recent data. So I think it's more about the decision-making process itself. You know, the flow of information from science into the policymakers is really slow. And I think also what tends to happen is the science will go in and then a binary decision needs to be made. And it's very difficult, I think, for the decision maker to unpack the complexity, especially from an environmental perspective and in the marine environment as well. You know, it's very rare to have a direct cause and effect type of situation. So I think that you know, the role of information and the transparency of information, the availability of information that's more direct would be a valuable thing to have. But I also feel as though perhaps decision makers can't necessarily cope with that complexity. So there are changes that could be made, but I think it's on both sides.
Sure. Miles, you bear the scars of many years of governmental decision-making. What impact do tighter budgets have on it? How does that work?
Tighter budgets, I think, impact in this area in all sorts of ways. I mean, most particularly, gathering evidence, gathering information is expensive, however you do it. And what I'm getting out of a lot of this discussion is the valuable opportunities we have to do a lot of that a great deal more cheaply. Part of what I'm picking up from our questioner here, though, is an issue about how policymakers handle the value issues, and in general policy making takes place in that gap between what we know and what we don't know, and it's in the areas where we have to make judgments based on value. Now, the besetting problem for policymakers is that the information we have at any one time is always incomplete. The understanding is complete, it's out of date, and so on and so forth. What this sort of technology is offering us is the opportunity at least to test our knowledge relatively easily. Also the opportunities to test our ideas, our policies relatively easily. But at the same time, perhaps to pick up some feelings from other people about what the value judgments are, what other people are thinking about choices and values within that sort of context as well.
Let me take another couple of questions, please, if there are any. A hand up there, and then one down here. Let's see if we can bundle a couple together. Sorry, you're about halfway down in the middle of the centre block there. Thank you. And then about 2 rows in front to follow. Thank you.
So, interest of openness, my name is Peter Parslow. I work in the Ordnance Survey, but I haven't discussed this question with anyone there.
Okay.
It's aimed particularly, I guess, at Miles, but others may be interested to have a go at answering. About 18 months ago, our previous government in the UK decided to spend, I I think, tens of millions of pounds a year in making information available, with part of the expressed intent being that small businesses would innovate on that information. Personally, I can think of some good examples, but is there any, or what do you see as the likelihood that that actually provides a return on that investment that the government was presumably hoping for?
Thank you. We'll put that one to Miles in a moment. There was another hand down here. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Hello, it's Robin McLaren from Edinburgh again. Hello. Got some advice to get from David and from Henk. Hello, Henk. Good to see you again. It's about capacity building. On the one side, I hear about open data. We're building all these infrastructures. We're providing access to interoperable data to people, and we're hoping for innovation to take place. Maybe we need some capacity building to stimulate that. But today, with David and the immersive technologies and the emergence of prosumers, I may be swayed that that's going to happen naturally without too much intervention for capacity building. So that's a little bit of a dilemma for me. So I'm looking for some advice this morning of the educationalist versus the innovator and stimulator in the marketplace and the creation of prosumers. So some advice, please, on that dilemma.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's start with Peter's question. Miles, return on investment from trying to take these sorts of, this sort of information out into the marketplace and get commercial users for it?
I'm not sure I can answer the question directly, not least because I'm not directly involved in that. I think I can point to the fact that making data more widely available has certainly helped our own organisations, our own agencies to make enormous savings, and we've touched on some of those earlier. One can see efficiencies being generated that way. We can also see novel technologies coming back to us, and that's all going to help. I'm not sure that that directly addresses what our speaker was after, though, because I didn't quite get the point there.
Does that answer your point? Sorry, can we give you the microphone back? Did that pick up your point? Is the one behind you? Sorry.
Maybe if I could add a bit to that. I think
please do, just while the microphone's going ahead.
There is clearly it's important to see what the benefits are in terms of increased revenues from businesses, perhaps the tax intake from those. The other side of the equation is the savings in terms of not having to have huge structures of people building licensing and selling the data internally to other government departments, which is part of that cost saving. So I think you need to see both sides of the equation as well.
Do we have to lose the whole concept of IP? Because, I mean, that's something that has companies put a very high value on their IP. Do they have to be less protective about that?
I think they probably have to be less protective, but no one's arguing that IP disappears. It's about how you make access to that information available is the key question, and trying to reduce the latency, the friction of getting access to information either within government or hopefully outside to the wider community.
Louisa, there are also big issues for government about data security, aren't there? I mean, how easily is that policed in far more open systems? Because even geospatial information can be very sensitive in security terms.
Yeah, I think a good example of that actually from the environmental perspective is protected areas and endangered species distributions. And depending on the perspective, you know, some of the protected areas are explicitly created to protect spawning aggregation areas, for example, or key breeding grounds or feeding grounds, or, you know, the last few trees where a bird is nesting. And so there's one camp that says we shouldn't make that information freely available because it could undermine the intentions of the protected areas. On the other hand, the argument is, well, probably the people who want to go there already know where those things are anyway. Let's be realistic. So I can't help but feel, from a personal perspective, that a lot of that type of information should just be more publicly available anyway. I think a lot of the fears are often unwarranted, and there is always going to be the contingent, the kind of minimal contingent that undermines the system, but that's true no matter what environment you're in. So I think we have to liberate ourselves from that constraint.
Did we answer your question? Are you happy with that?
So just to confirm that, yeah, that's been very helpful. Miles and Dave, thank you.
Thanks very much. Let's pick up Robin's question with David and with Henk. Capacity building, it's about accessibility, or is it about education? Do we need to make this information more accessible, more easy to understand? There is a lot of jargon around all of this.
Yes, I think accessibility is, the guy from Google also mentioned this point. Accessibility is actually key to generating innovation. But I think that I'd like to use very quickly an analogy. We live in an age which is almost like a nuclear explosion. What's happening with society, with the widespread sharing of knowledge and new ideas, pinging off people from all over the world, it's rather like what happens within nuclear fission or nuclear fusion. And I think as a society, we need to understand whether we're actually creating a nuclear bomb or the equivalent, leading to the destruction of society, because all of these things having unforeseen consequences which will go on to lead to disaster, or are we able to harness all this energy that's being generated by these ideas in a manageable way? And this is where I think infrastructure becomes very, very important, is you need those regulating conditions to be able to manage the energy that's being generated by all these ideas.
Henk, I hesitate to ask an academic whether education has had its day, but the issue of capacity building is an important one. Governments everywhere particularly are keen to get people much more engaged in designing their own services, choosing their own menus of services and so forth. How do we go about that capacity building? How do we extend it to reach much beyond the academic community that it's reaching just now?
I think I have tried to give that example of disaster management. At the moment that you are faced with problems which are not simple, and environmental problems or disaster problems are not simple, you cannot expect that somebody who can handle an iPad can also be the one who's able to think spatially and being creative. So we need educated people. And thinking spatially is something special. And I will never forget, I started as a teacher in statistics, and when SPSS came on the market, students had the feeling that it was just a button you had to push. But there is something more in understanding what it means to be, let's say, significant or not. So I have no doubt that we need geographers or
So does that
people.
mean, sorry, does that mean there are limitations then in your mind to the extent to which the example that Inspire has set can be extended into other fields?
No, I think we have to make a distinction. I'm sure that it's wonderful to have all these data available for, let's call it, simple applications. We have one of our students made an application in the Netherlands called The Train, and that gives you immediately the information when the next train, the nearest train, is leaving. And he did that without, let's say, the official certification or the official access to the Dutch railway information. It's even mentioned in the application. And they brought him to court. And the good news is that he has now the possibility to go on with his company because this data is freely available.
We do that with the trams in Edinburgh. It's about 20 years. I'll take one more question, a quick one, just right behind you there, with the man in the blue shirt. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. I'll take one more. A quick question would help, please.
Okay, Ian Jackson from One Geology Partnerships. In the context of Inspire themes 2 and 3, do the panel think that the pursuit of perfection by scientists and the metrics of citations is a bigger barrier to data access than actually charging for it?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's just go along the panel briefly with that short answer for each of you. Louisa, would you like to kick us off on that?
Sure. I mean, I think that the peer review process is the way it's currently set up is an inherent barrier to innovation because it takes so long to get publications out there and therefore the data to be made more publicly available. It's a really huge issue, and I think it slows down the entire process of decision making. So I think that at the same time as trying to revolutionize the way in which data are generated, we also really need to look very critically and creatively with how we can make scientific peer review more effective, more rapid, more open. It's starting to happen, but it's, I think, lagging behind. And
yet customers need assurance then.
They do need assurance, and I can't help but agree completely with Louisa on this point. I think there is a huge issue with the strive for citations. Maybe, you know, some people have discussed this as a possible solution, that you get equal value in terms of your academic esteem by publishing a data set as you do by having a paper published. I'd like to see people looking at those sorts of approaches and saying, oh, there's as much academic value in you making your experimental data available as there is then in other people publishing results on it.
How well would that go down with faculty, Henk?
Yeah, to be honest, I would give a completely different answer. I think by discussing innovation is one thing, but how do we come from innovation to implementation? And I think that's much more critical than we ever thought about. So I like to discuss that topic another time.
Okay. David, the implication of the scenario that you were painting for us is that the consumer will control, the consumer will drive the pace.
I think the consumer is driving it already. I think that's the main issue, and the point that the questioner was asking. I think sometimes scientists do present barriers, because if you look at the 3 Thomas Cook criteria, attractiveness, accessibility and affordability, scientists are placing barriers to innovation, because they create barriers around affordability in the sense that people cannot afford, if there's something people don't understand and it's not presented in a way that they will find usable, they won't spare the time or attention to be able to work on it. So I think today's session is really all about building bridges between different disciplines, so that we're able to talk the same language and benefit through this cross-fertilisation of ideas.
Which would seem to mean, Miles, changes in the way decisions are made about investment and things, as well as changes in the way in which we assess the quality of stuff.
No, I think the key issue there is about how we assess quality and the speed with which we do it. The presumption these days with government, at least, is openness on information. And there's a very, very sound reason for that. I think of it in terms of Donald Rumsfeld and his famous categories of known unknowns and so on. The one he didn't mention was the unknown knowns. And the besetting problem for us always is to find the people out there who know the things we don't know about. Now, you don't do that any other way than by making things available, and the difficulty is to get over the barriers. Now, if you look at practice, for example, in the US at the moment, government-funded data goes out when it's published, when it's available. We're not quite there yet here. I think we've got things to do to make that openly, to make data more openly available quicker. But we've also got things to do about the speed with which we get peer review through which we get quality control through, about making available the information about the quality of the data and so on as well. But to get it out is vital to us. We need it. It's not just that everybody else needs it too.
I regret to say the information I have to impart is that is where we have run out of time. You are now going to go and have some coffee and then move into parallel sessions. Before you do, would you please join me in thanking Louisa Wood, Ed Parsons, Henk Scholten, David Wortley and Miles Parker.